I got on a bicycle and went to the last village next to the border
By yourself?
initially, and then I had two friends join me later on. My dad was following me on a bicycle some distance back to make sure that I got past the Russian checkpoint. And the way I camouflaged myself was I put an empty milk can on the handlebar and joined a bunch of farmers that were going back to that village from the market. So I was part of that group. The Russian looked out, saw the, and went through, right through. And
this is a question, sorry to interrupt. Did any of you tell anybody you were going to escape?
yes, I told my family. My dad knew it because he participated in the ruse. And I said, my mother, I just told her, I'm leaving, goodbye. And
You too, Joseph? Did you tell people?
No, I did not tell, except my immediate friends who saw me jumping out from the window. By the way, I had no coat, I had no cap, no nothing, and it was cold. I got a train ride, but I had to jump off the moving train before we reached the city of Chorna, because the rumor was that we would be arrested there at the Chorna station. I had no map, no idea where the border was. I ran into a group of other stragglers who went around without knowing anything. So we were moving around for 2 days, blind. We found a canal, but they said the other side was not Austria, but was still Hungary. We were confused. We were cold. And eventually, moving westwards along the canal, there was a person on the other side who spoke Viennese dialect. So I knew that was Austria then. But then we first dismantled a watchtower and built a raft. And while we were doing it, one of the guys was surprised and shot in the chest and died. So it was a rather difficult time. But eventually, later, I managed to get across with the raft. And the other side, I was greeted by a journalist who turned out to be James Michener, the well-known writer, who wanted to do an interview with me in English, but my English was sort of not operational then. It's not very operational even now, but
Yes, it is.
in my defense, English was my sixth language, and by that time my brain was simply saturated.
How many languages do you all speak? Just curious.
I speak real well only Hungarian, German, and English. I can read Italian. I know hundreds of Russian poems, but I don't really speak Russian.
Because that was the requirement, right?
But again, Italian is fairly good.
Yeah. Do any of you remember any Russian?
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to remember any Russian?
yes,
Russian is a beautiful language.
Yes, beautiful music
Honestly,
too.
I have no ill feelings towards Russians. They are very nice people individually. Their governments were always screwed up, but the people are really nice everywhere. They are warm-hearted people who love to sing. They love poetry. They are good people. And it's very sad, you know,
Right.
that we always had this Cold War with the Russians, that we need an enemy, you know.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Yes,
So
sir.
so my question is, what from your life under communism, either before the revolution or during the revolution, that while you are living here in the United States, even though it's many miles away from Hungary or maybe many years later, what might you see now in your life in the United States that either triggers something in you or provokes a response from you to something here that you see? For example, the example of you keep your guns, Texans, because you may need them to fight tyranny. What is something that maybe has triggered something in you here, and that makes you think, you know, I've seen that before, and I fought against it once, and I hated it once, and by God, I'm going to fight it again, and I'm going to hate it again. What have you seen here that triggers that and said, I've already been in that fight, and I'll go man to man again, and I'll do it again.
I can tell you from my point of view, I remember well the German Nazi propaganda. I was born in 1934. I learned German when I was 4 years old from Hitler's speeches. I was exposed to communist propaganda every day. Everything was unison. And I'm greatly bothered by the uniform bias of the American news media. I don't see much variety in the American newspapers reporting. I write a letter to the Austin Statesman. They would not publish anything which does not fit exactly their editorial opinions. I think the American news media is very one-sided, and we are exposed to a lot of propaganda now. There is more press freedom in Hungary now than in the United States. In Hungary, you get left and right equally. In the United States, 90% of the news media is left liberal. There is no major conservative mass outlet. That bothers me.
Anyone else care to add?
I would have to agree.
Hints of the old world or things
That
that you...
includes Amazon. I read his book, Nagyvári's book, and submitted a critique or a description of it. And part of the response that I had to do with refugees. And I made a point of how the Hungarian refugees fit into the American system. They retained their Hungarianism, but they became Americans.
Assimilated, in essence?
Yeah,
100%.
we all contributed to this country in some way. And I had to rewrite that part 4 times, and I'm still not sure that they published it.
Yeah.
And again, writing to the local newspaper about the migration issue and other, never gets published.
Great, thank you. Sue, you want to add?
I would have to say that I agree with that, and I think that it's really important to have, both the left and the right represented. But when a majority is towards the leftist leanings, then the American public gets cheated, and a constant diet of that has people thinking a different way. For example, when I was in Europe and I was listening to the BBC, I'm going like, holy smoke, they said this, and it was like they gave both sides to the story. They said to one dictator, how can you say that you love your people and you've just executed 30,000 of them? We never see anything like that in our news media about things that are untrue or something like that. Very important that both sides are represented so people can really understand that there are 2 sides, not just one side.
Great, thank you. Next question.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you very much for sharing these very painful memories. I'm myself Hungarian-American. I was born after 56. But even though I was born after 56, that was just such a shocking and traumatizing event in the life of all Hungarians, even unborn Hungarians like myself, that I grew up in the shadow of 1956. My grandparents were gravely suffering, and of course, as you know, anybody who owned anything was taken away during communist years. My grandfather, who was inventor and had a little fortune, all of it was taken away. My other grandfather was thrown into prison and tortured for 7 years because one day he happened to say that he didn't like communism. And my father, because he participated in 1956, lost his job. And so by the time I was born, he had no job. So it really put a stamp on all of us. So when I came to America, it was kind of a dream fulfilled for me. And I became a history teacher here. I had my degree back from Hungary, but I really became passionate about teaching. So I I became a high school history teacher, and I actually majored for my master's degree. I majored in history, and I was particularly interested in the 20th century, very tumultuous and very painful century, and especially the Cold War. And one of my major papers was about 1956, not surprisingly. Now, it was with real great shock that I discovered through my research that actually the United States of America done a very detailed study, the CIA done a very detailed study in early 1956 to see if Hungary would be a country where an uprising would be possible, and if such, would that uprising should benefit from the help of the United States of America. And this some 80-page long paper came to the conclusion that the answer is no. However, the Voice of America radio station and Free Europe radio station, which was like the voice of heaven for all Hungarians, even though it was forbidden to listen to it because it was broadcasted from the West, every Hungarian secretly listened to it. And America was flooding Hungary with a lot of broadcasts that said, Hungarians, rise up, show the world that you are ready to fight. My dad listened to that 5 times a day. He would be up 4 o'clock in the morning before they really started to bother those broadcasts. And this was a lifeline for all of us. You just described that horrible time when we were all scared that the secret police is coming to arrest us and take us away. And we know about the tortures. And this was the last hope. That was the last beam of life. We truly looked at America. I remember I grew up after 56, after those tanks crushed Hungary. We looked at America like it was heaven. Mm-hmm. This is where all the help was coming from. And I have to say, it was with great disappointment to discover that a decision was made 11 months earlier, that America would not help in any shape and form. And at the same time, Vice President Nixon, at the time, very cynically made a statement. It would serve our purposes during the Cold War really well if one of the satellite nations under the oppression of the Soviet Union would stage an uprising, and then it would be stifled in blood. And it happened, and yes, it was beneficial, because all through Western Europe, all the communist parties suddenly lost all respect. Famous intellectuals like Sartre and Camus in France threw their communist papers to the trash can. So I think that it is something that we need to recognize and realize that mistakes were made, even on the part of our wonderful country, the United States of America. And this is something, when we talk about seeing both sides, maybe just should be mentioned for fairness' sake.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Sue, you want to comment?
Yes, I do want to comment on that. Nixon picked up my sister and at the top of the plane right before you went in when we left from Austria. But I can tell you that I will agree with you on one thing, and that is that Radio Free Europe constantly bombarded the countries of Eastern Europe, the satellite countries, to revolt and that they would come and help them. And as the Hungarians were begging the United States to come and help them, there was silence on the other end until the Hungarians couldn't be broadcasting anymore back to say, please come and help us like you promised. I still have people in their 80s who have been in the military and who know that I'm from Hungary. They apologize to me for what the United States did. you know, I bear no ill will towards that, but the truth is they promised, the Hungarians begged them to come, we're fighting for freedom, please come and help us like you promised, and there was silence from the other end.
A lot of young people died because of the Radio Free Europe, because on November 4th, Sunday morning, when the Soviet army returned to put the revolution down, it was followed by the re-election of Eisenhower on November 6th. So the Radio Free Europe said, fight for 2 more days, hold out for 2 more days, then the Americans the election is going to be over and the Americans are going to come help you. A lot of people died with that last instruction in their ears.
Yes, ma'am.
I think we are looking.
Wait, we need the microphone.
Hi, how you doing? I want to thank you all. I want to thank you all for coming and sharing your testimony with us, because if the audience would really listen, and this is just a comment, I hear the passion of all that you've gone through. And as an African American, I'm not trying to ignite anything, but in history, in American history, we have gone through a lot of the same things. I was sitting here listening to the 16 points that you all had mentioned, and a lot of the things that the students fought for, we actually went through a lot of the similar things. But when I look at it from my point of view as an African American, a lot of times in our history, my parents would have been here talking about the same things you all are talking about. And we've had an opportunity, our generation, to benefit from the revolutions and civil rights that our people have gone through. But I was happy to hear it from another point of view, to listen to someone else of a different race, different color, different people talk about all of the different atrocities and the things that they've had to struggle through. And it really has inspired me as just a human being. And so I wanted to let you know how much I appreciate you all sharing your information, because people that have never gone through anything like that, they can't always identify with it. But to hear someone else's testimony and say what they've gone through, you carry your history with you all the time. I remember my history. It comes with me as an African-American person all the time, and there are a lot of similarities. And it just makes me respect people more and realize that we have to learn how to treat each other well. And you know, during the civil rights time, I'm going to be very brief and finish up. They had to fight for education. They had to fight to go to school. Had to fight to go to sit at a restaurant and have dinner, to go to use the restroom. All of these different things. So my last question would be: the students, did any of the 16 points that the students wrote out, was anything ever fulfilled during their revolution? Did the government do anything? Did anything change out of all this that they stood for on that day? And then the last question is, do you know how many students died during that time?
Brilliant comments. Thank you for that.
The government, free government existed in Hungary only for 3 or 4 days. And that government decreed and accepted some of those points, but of course, they did not have the power to make it a reality. Like, they declared neutrality of the country, but I mean, it takes United Nations resolutions to accept that. So basically, we had a few days of freedom where everyone felt wonderful around November the 1st. All Saints' Day, the whole city was out in the streets. There was euphoria, there was brotherhood and everything, great celebration, but then everything actually changed. Now, how many people actually died? I don't think that there are really reliable data for that. There are exaggerated numbers like 20,000. The minimum number is like between 2,000 or 3,000. From our college, there were only 2 students who were shot, not in the fight, but